Trauma Therapist Podcast Plus listeners can listen to episodes early and ad-free right now. Become a Plus listener by going to Apple Podcasts, searching for the Trauma Therapist Podcast, and signing up today. Welcome to the Trauma Therapist Podcast, a show about the incredible people dedicated to helping those who've experienced trauma. My name is Guy McPherson, and my mission is to raise the awareness of trauma and to inspire each of us to help those around us. All right, Pernille, here we go. All right, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the podcast. Very excited to have back Pernille, Yilmam. Pernille, welcome.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And I'm sorry, I mispronounced your last name, which is Yilmam.
That is correct. Yeah.
All right.
No
Awesome.
problem.
It's funny to get that. So Pernille is the founder of Mind Blossom, which strives to prevent and combat mental illness through education and fostering community support. Mind Blossom envisions a world where mental health education is integrated into all community centers, schools, and companies with the aim to prevent and reduce mental illness. They integrate that with humanity, with science, by using mental health education, an evidence-based method to empower people's understanding of their own and others' physical and mental well-being. Pernille, welcome back. And congratulations. Marriage.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes.
Awesome. So before we get going here, remind our listeners where you're from originally and where you are currently.
Yes, I am from Denmark originally. I moved to the US when I was 21, and I currently live in Boston, Massachusetts. Although actually by the end of this month, I'm moving to New Haven, Connecticut.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
So let's contextualize everything. How did all this start for you?
Great question. Yeah, I asked myself that too. Okay, so I have a long story of mental health challenges myself. I think we spoke more about that last time we were on this podcast. And that really drove me into studying neuroscience and psychology. I was really wondering about those big questions, like why do we become the way we are? How do we think the way we think? Why do we have the mental illnesses that we have? Why do some people not have the mental illnesses that they have, right? And so I'm prompting resilience here. And so that really led me into those studies. And long story short, I went through a PhD, a postdoc, and I did research for over a decade in various academic institutions. And I was doing good. I was doing great. I was on a good track to become a professor at a prestigious university. But it came to a point where I realized I'm healed. I understand where I came from. I understand my challenges, and I've recovered. But I really wanted to bring all of that information that was so pivotal in my own journey to the people, and particularly to the people that wouldn't normally go to college or get a PhD. So that really spurred me to leave academia. And eventually, a few years later, I founded Mind Blossom, which is now 1.5 years old, and where we're really focusing on providing information, like the information you would get if you are in a PhD program or are in a college program studying neuroscience and psychology. But we're making that accessible to everybody who's not, or maybe the people who even think that they don't have to talk about mental health, right? Mm-hmm. And so breaking those stigmas.
So you started out by saying you did have some mental health challenges. What were they?
Oh, how much time do we have?
What were they not?
Yeah, right. So it's a little bit of a sad story, and there are definitely some trigger warnings that should be mentioned here. I started at around age 11. I had persistent depressive disorder. That's what we typically, that's kind of what we call depression in children. And I started the first behaviors of an eating disorder. I wouldn't say that the thought patterns we often think about that are associated with an eating disorder were present already then, but I started not eating and restricting my food, throwing it out. all of that not so good stuff. And then I think the most significant aspect is that I was very suicidal. And so I had a lot of suicidal ideation. I planned out my suicide. I
Wow.
contemplated it, stood in front of the knives. That was how I was going to use it. Yeah. So that's all that started at a very young age. And that lasted until I was around 13. And then I had a period of kind of spontaneous recovery for various reasons that then later on catapulted into a really serious eating disorder. And that eating disorder was compounded by anxiety, depression. I got really severe insomnia, didn't sleep for days. I've never had bipolar or anything like that, but that like restlessness and inability to sleep, in large part because of anxiety, was something that came to define my life for many, many years up until like my early 20s. And again, long story short, several panic attacks and various other challenges intertwined, I finally really started seeking recovery. And that recovery process that was a painting. That was an abstract modern art painting that developed over time. And it worked at the end. So many different therapists and providers were involved. A few different medications to support me as well were involved, and definitely community support. And that has been so critical, just establishing that sense of belonging.
What was that point? And I want to get into Mind Blossom, but what was the point at which you decided to seek help?
Yeah. So I sought help several times, and I'm sure a lot of listeners out there can relate to, wanting to seek help, but then not really, right? And so this pattern of going back and forth was really, really prevalent for me too. I will say where the last turning point was, where I really thought like, I'm done. I'm recovering or I'm out of here, was right around the beginning of the pandemic. And as so many people say, the pandemic had silver linings. And that's really when I started realizing, like, if I want to fully recover, because I had already gotten very much better by then. But if I wanted to really recover from my body image challenges, the body dysmorphic disorder that I was struck with, then I needed to be okay with my body. And I needed to be so okay with it that it didn't really matter that much what my body looked like. People would still love me. And I know that sounds a little bit absurd. Like, obviously, people will love you no matter what you look like. It's what's on the inside that matters. But for me,
we like to hope so.
Yeah, right. But for me, that wasn't always the case. So I grew up in a household where it was really focused on what you looked like. And if you changed your appearance typically to looking a little bit bigger, then you were gonna know about that. And so these two things just came to be so going so hand in hand for me that was the last thing I really needed to address. And that was a game changer. But I'll say there have been multiple aspects prior to that, since, what was that, 2015, where I really wanted recovery. But it took, 5 years before I really embraced it and really mentally was ready to absorb it. Does that make sense?
It does. And then you don't just seek education. I mean, you dive into intense, right? Where does that come from? What was going on for you such that you're like, okay, I need to find out what's going on. I'm going to go become a neuroscientist. I mean, that's extreme.
Yeah. I think sometimes extremes are born out of extremes. I grew up in a household where, you didn't really get many answers to questions. And for various reasons. I'm the first person in my household, in my entire family, to receive a college education, and obviously the first one to get a PhD. I had so many questions. I was so curious. I was that student in the classroom that would sit on the front row and ask questions, right? Like, I love learning. So that plays a huge role in it. But really trying to understand myself, that reflection, it's really something I enjoy. And I really benefited a lot from it. I went to therapy for the first time when I was 16. Unfortunately, I was pulled out early by my mother because she thought the therapy made me sick. And so I didn't really have a lot of exposure to self-reflection and the ability to really dive in and have these conversation in a very healthy way. And so I think that drove a big part of it.
When you were in this program, when you were becoming educated and seeking education, what were some of the things you found? What did you want to find out?
Yeah. Ugh. I really wanted to understand why some people develop mental illness. And that's what I did. I was at UC Berkeley as an exchange student there. That's what enabled me to go from Denmark to the US. And there I was so lucky to be involved with work at Daniela Kaufer's lab there, where we studied like how does the brain change in rats that have not had not so good parents and have had good parents. And we could see, what were their behavioral changes and what were their brain changes. And I think that research is fascinating. It originated back in, I don't know, I want to say the 70s and 80s by Dr. Meany in Canada. And it's something that really drove my interest. Now, what happened, and what I think a lot of people with eating disorders probably can relate to, and other types of more perfectionistic tendencies, is that I wanted to be really good at doing neuroscience research. In fact, I wanted people to think that I was really good. And so it was a little bit more important that I got a project that would make me successful rather than me searching out my inner desires. So all of this to say that when I ended up in my PhD program, I actually ended up studying a neurodevelopmental disorder that was focused on the genetic aspect, like how do genes change your brain? And that is also super interesting, but not exactly why I went into neuroscience to begin with, but it was a more you can say bulletproof way of making sure you've got some good publications out. Now, with that said, I'm acknowledging here that in part was driven by probably my eating disorders and the traits that kind of can come along with that, the perfectionism, workaholic type of tendencies. At least those were true for me. It's been really, really cool to be able to study the environmental aspects. So what it's like, how does growing up in an unhealthy childhood, an unhealthy household impact your brain? And then how do the genes impact your brain? So now I'm in a position where I really understand those two dichotomies really well. And that kind of blended all together when I then went to Harvard University for my postdoc.
When you learned that the importance of the environment, the external environment on one's psyche, developmental journey in the sense, did that give you some solace? Did that give you some relief? Were you able to exhale and say, oh my God, there's nothing wrong with me? Was that too simplistic?
No, I definitely think so. I think from a very young age, I had a very clear sense of something's not good in this household. It's not about me, it's about them. And that saved me because so many people, end up internalizing, I got gaslit a lot by my mother. And so I was told often that I was lying about things I wasn't lying about, that I didn't love my sister was a very common accusation, that I was very selfish. She told me I should never have children, things like that were easy to internalize. And some of these things I did come to think of as like, oh, they must be truths. But lucky enough, I didn't have that mentality. I didn't absorb it so easily. So I think I had that understanding pretty early on, but seeing the science of it and seeing, epigenetics, how your environment can change your genome so that you become more likely to develop depression, anxiety, eating disorders, and anything else that is out there. That really, that is powerful to know. And I think that's where, to me, like that saying about knowledge is power becomes very truthful.
You're saying so many things that are kind of inspiring me to go off, but there's this common knowledge that it takes a while, maybe even years, for the research to filter down into the boots on the ground therapy. First of all, in terms of the mental health field, is that true? And what are you seeing or not seeing in treatment
Mhm.
That needs to happen.
Yeah. I mean, yes, that is true. And then we can take it a step further where we're not just talking about therapists or mental health professionals. If we talk about teachers, community center staff members, and anybody else who's just a regular parent, not involved with mental health, they know even less, right? And I'm not
Right.
talking about that they need to know what was published yesterday in Nature,
Right.
right? They know
Right.
that's not necessary. We're talking about the knowledge that is foundational for the way that we're approaching mental health, that we're understanding where it's coming from. How can we address it? How can we support it? And I think where there is the biggest need right now, and I mean, there are so many ways in which there are needs, right? But one of the
Mhm.
biggest ones is really prevention, in my opinion. We spend so much time and resources on crisis and developing ways that we can address crises, but we don't develop as many government funded ways of developing prevention programs. Now, where you see most of these prevention programs unfold are in schools. So that will be that you have a workshop, maybe a couple of workshops in a school setting for the high school students or middle school students, but you don't really see it being delivered as professional development to the teachers or staff members in other settings where these youth members often are. And that to me is devastating because these staff members, teachers, various other types of like after school staff members, community center staff members, they're often the first responders. They're the ones that are going to be able to see those early warning signs, just like the parents could. And we should support the parents as well with these types of information. So there is a huge lack in terms of how we are disseminating preventative information about mental health and illness. And
Like what? Preventative information such as what?
just knowing what the early warning signs are, knowing that, and I know like to you and I, that might sound like, well, doesn't everybody know? But they don't. These are the programs we run out in community centers that are here in Boston, for example. And people don't know the early warning signs, or they don't understand that having an addiction, it's not a choice. That
Mhm.
some of them, still believe that it is a choice. And I understand that because that has been the lingo for a long time. And if you're not a part of this conversation, you wouldn't know that that has changed. If you just listen to, your generation or previous generations about what is addiction, you might say this is a choice. And when you're working with those youth members that come to your school or community center, you scold them rather than
Right.
supporting them. And so
Right.
that's where, again, there are so many places in which we can say there is a big need, but it's just one of those needs that I am faced with a lot. And that I think we could really do a lot of preventative work by simply educating people better, hence the mental health education, which I'm now so focused on.
Okay. So, Mind Blossom, why did you start this?
Yeah, so it's pretty simple. As I mentioned earlier, I really came to appreciate how much my education played a role in my healing. And I want to really recognize that I had so many different therapists and various nurses and other supporters involved in my healing journey. But the education and knowledge, as you were also saying, about understanding the role of my environment, the role of genomes, how they play in, that was a big game changer for me and really made me much more comfortable with being who I am and understanding that things can change. I'm not stuck here. I don't have to have an eating disorder for the rest of my life. So I wanted to bring that out to people. And what better way of doing that than having a nonprofit where we go and do it for free? So that's really how we started. I'm very passionate about developing community, and what we do see as a indirect consequence, but planned out indirect consequence of educating people is that they're building community. And so, for example, when we are in these community centers and we are having them come in on a regular basis to these weekly sessions, we see at the end that they feel better about each other. And so they're communicating better. They're working together better. They want to hang out more. And that positive atmosphere among adults is a trickle-down effect on youth. I think we know this with parents, right? If the parents in the household are doing well, then the children also typically do better. Yeah.
So let's talk about the programs you're offering. What specifically you're doing Who are you reaching out to?
Yeah, so first off, we want to talk to anybody who wants to listen. I'm very passionate about this. With that said, our target audiences are staff members, for example, teachers, community center staff members, mainly in underserved areas. That's where we do our free of cost nonprofit work. And then parents, caregivers, the ones that are taking care of the kiddos at home, or the ones that are expecting. And then also youth. We go out and we talk to youth. We provide programs there. I'll say our bread and butter, we're still very young. So, we are developing different visions and we're going in different directions. But the places where we've really made an impact so far are among staff members and among caregivers. And we have done so by having these programs that I've been alluding to several times throughout this conversation, where we have weekly sessions where they come, we talk about a specific topic or whatever that program involves. And we do things like ranging from what is mental illness? What are the early warning signs, right? And we talk about different types of mental illnesses, or sometimes we just focus on one. But then we also practice effective communication strategies. So like, how do you go to your doctor and ask for an evaluation for your child? Sounds simple, really difficult, especially if that doctor is not really willing to provide it. So how do you advocate for yourself? How do you talk to your child or a youth to make sure, you're doing it in a way where they want to open up and they feel that it's trusting? And then lastly, where do you find support? And again, we have some great programs. 988 is a new program that's been rolled out. Most of the people we interact with don't know about 988 until we tell them. That is, the federal government has been spending billions into this program, and the people that are in the most need don't know about it. So such a simple thing, we can go out and talk to them about. But there are also the local resources. There are what are the peer support centers that are happening in your local community? Often they don't know about that. The schools don't know about it. The community centers don't know about it. The parents don't know about it. So how do we disseminate that very local information to that local region so that they can benefit?
You are unquestionably on fire on this topic. I mean,
yes.
Of course, you could feel it. It's amazing. And you're providing extremely important, vital, foundational information to the community. Recently, within the last several years, I don't know, there's been within the culture a greater awareness of mental health and the causes of mental health. What are you seeing in terms of that? There's still a stigma, huge stigma.
Yeah, it's encouraging. Again, this is another silver lining of the pandemic. Suddenly, I think people that weren't faced with mental health challenges were faced with them and came to recognize, oh, this is a challenge we need to talk about. We have seen a rise in the number of youth that are dying by suicide. That's something that will wake people up. It's terrible when it has to come to being, to death before people will listen. But these are some of the things that I think have made a difference in that direction. Now, I recently wrote an article for Aeon, which is a digital magazine, on the topic of mental health and illness, stigma, and discrimination in the workplace. And there, as you're probably aware, are huge developments on, companies are offering apps and they're offering yoga sessions and they're offering who knows what other small benefits to people to support their mental health. But that is not enough. And so what they're doing, in my opinion, I understand sometimes it comes from good intentions, but it's also a little bit of a Band-Aid on a very big wound, right? And so we're telling people, oh, during your lunch session, why don't you go and do yoga instead, right? That's absurd. Here is an app. You can do some mindfulness. That's way to address your burnout, right? These are not substantial ways to actually address the challenges at hand. So we need better interventions. We need things to change more. But what I am really encouraged about is that the conversation is opening up more. It's a hot topic, right? Nowadays, everybody is into mental health in whatever capacity that is. but we're not seeing, the interventions roll out or the support system roll out in the way we would like it to. So we have to keep making sure that the conversation keeps going, but that we also see that the government, the companies, the states actually do the interventions that we have them to do to address this problem.
Such as what? You're talking about, the yoga class during lunch is a Band-Aid. What would you like to see happen?
I'm incredibly biased. I'll say my biased opinion first, and then I'll come up with some unbiased opinions after. My first biased opinion is we should provide education, professional development that is about mental health and early intervention signs, understanding it better in yourself and others, whether that's in the companies or in the schools or in a community center or in an after school program. Like, all of the adults should be trained on this. And this should be a part of their professional development. You can call it a benefit, call it whatever you want, but this is a place where people can demonstrate increased awareness, where they can support others better. And we also know that their own well-being increases. There's almost half a century of research on mental health education, which is also known as psychoeducation in the scientific literature, which really demonstrates people do better. Teachers do better. Military veterans do better. Policymakers do better. Marketing professionals do better. And so when we're seeing that people are starting to do better, we know there is a financial positive outcome out of that as well. I was just at the NAMI convention, which is, for anybody who doesn't know, it's the National Alliance for Mental Illness. I gave a talk there where I'm talking about, what are the financial benefits of providing mental health education to caregivers and also other groups. So that's my very biased opinion, that we should all be having this mental health education. Some of the other things that I enjoy seeing, and I think we could benefit from more, are the more collaborative care models that are happening across school systems, but also are starting to be offered, for example, like coaching services and therapy services to companies, where we're seeing that students can more easily access treatment when they need it. It's more individualized. It's more long-term. That's a large shift in how it's been done before, where normally you were relying on your individual insurance to go and see therapy. So now tying in therapy into the workplace and into also the school place, I think are, dramatic improvements as well that I think we should be pushing forward.
Interesting that, there oftentimes has to be this financial reason, the benefit that we have to learn about, our mental health. Look, the work you're doing is incredible. I mean, it's so friggin' inspiring. You are inspiring.
Yeah.
So people listening to this, therapists of all kinds, survivors, what do you think they need to know to facilitate, to help educate their clients, their family members, et cetera?
I think the one thing I would say to that specific question is that education really works. When we educate people about mental health, they typically will start doing better. They'll start being better at taking their medications. They'll start being better at seeking effective treatment. They will get better finances. They do better. So even if you feel like that's not worthy of your time, please think again, because it is worthy of your time. It's worthy of their time too. And anybody out there who is in recovery right now, I would highly encourage you to educate yourself about what's going on with you and do it from all of the different angles and possibilities that seem right to you. It's really, it could be a game changer. And for most people it is. And I'm not just saying this from my own anecdotal experiences. We have almost half a century of research demonstrating that this works. It's completely bonkers that it's not already a part of, the way that we talk in our culture. So please start doing that for yourself and others.
Pernille, Yilmam of Mind Blossom. How do people get in contact with you?
Yeah. So You can always check out our website, mindblossom.org, and please feel free to send me an email anytime. It's my first name, Pernille @mindblossom.org. So pretty simple. But if you want to skip my first name, you can also just send an email to info@mindblossom.
Okay. We'll have those linked up here at the show notes page at thetraumatherapistpodcast.com. Pernille, thanks so much for coming back. Love talking to you. Welcome back anytime.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate being here.
Take care.
Bye.